I never imagined a rooftop joke could destroy my structured life. I only wanted to tease my best friend after a suffocating family dinner. When I casually proposed, Avery Quinn replied, "I thought you would never ask." 3 days later, I discovered my signature forged on documents meant to bury me in debt. That accidental question uncovered Avery's hidden feelings and triggered a ruthless retaliation against my own family and the man I almost married. My name is Scarlett Kendrick. I am 34 years old, and if there is one thing people know about me, it is that I do not panic. As the Director of Contract Compliance at Arborline Civic Partners, a prominent urban development consulting firm right here in Charlotte, my entire career is built on anticipating disasters and quietly making them disappear. I spend my days dissecting thousands of pages of legal jargon, looking for the traps people try to hide in plain sight. I find the buried liabilities, the unapproved signatures, the subtle shifts in phrasing that could cost millions. I am the fixer. I am the one who cleans up the messes left by careless people, the one who remains perfectly composed while the boardroom catches fire. It is a highly valued skill in corporate America. However, it is a suffocating, inescapable curse in my personal life. Tonight, that curse felt significantly heavier than usual. I had just survived another excruciating Sunday dinner at my parents' house, a sprawling suburban estate that always felt more like a staged museum exhibition than a family home. The dining room air was thick with the smell of roasted lamb, expensive red wine, and unspoken ultimatums. My mother, Celeste, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, her posture perfectly rigid, her smile painted on like a fragile porcelain glaze that might crack if she breathed too deeply. Beside her sat my father, Randall, swirling his scotch in a crystal glass and actively avoiding any form of direct eye contact with me. And sitting directly across from me, radiating a quiet, smug energy, was my younger sister, Violet. We were gathered there for one specific reason: to discuss the final arrangements for Violet's upcoming engagement party. The groom-to-be was Grant Hollowell, who, until exactly 18 months ago, was my fiancé. If you asked my family, the fact that Grant had seamlessly transitioned from my ring finger to my sister's was nothing more than an unfortunate but entirely manageable hiccup. An emotional accident. That was the exact clinical phrase my mother used. She had placed her perfectly manicured hand over mine during the salad course, her rings digging slightly into my skin, and looked at me with eyes that demanded absolute compliance. "You have to be mature about this, Scarlett," she had said, her voice dripping with that distinct southern sweetness that was actually pure poison. "We all need to present a united front right now. The Hollowell merger is simply too important for the family business to let petty grievances get in the way." It was just an emotional accident between Violet and Grant, and they eventually found their true way to each other. "You are so strong. You have always been the strong one. We know you will be the bigger person. Show up to the party looking lovely, and smile for the photographs. It is about preserving the family image. Darling, we need you to do this." I had chewed my overcooked lamb, tasted absolutely nothing, and nodded. I always nodded. I was the good daughter, the reliable buffer, the emotional shock absorber for a family that refused to navigate their own wreckage. They fully expected me to swallow my humiliation so they could digest their dinner in perfect peace. Across the table, Violet had just smiled, a small, triumphant little smirk, and went back to discussing imported floral centerpieces with my mother, as if she had not single-handedly stolen the life I had meticulously planned. I left the house the exact second it was socially acceptable to claim I had an early morning meeting. The drive back into the heart of the city was a blur of passing streetlights and my own white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. I did not go back to my own immaculate, painfully empty townhouse. I knew I could not be alone with the deafening silence of my own walls tonight. Instead, I drove straight to the one place in Charlotte where I did not have to pretend to be bulletproof. Avery Quinn's apartment building was an older, slightly run-down brick structure with a rickety iron fire escape and a flat rooftop that offered a sprawling, unobstructed view of the city skyline. Avery had been my absolute best friend for exactly 8 years. We met in our mid-20s when we were both grinding our way through entry-level corporate hell, bonding over cheap takeout and terrible bosses, and she had immediately become the solitary anchor in my otherwise turbulent life. She was a senior paralegal specializing in commercial litigation, a woman who was sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal, and the only person on earth who could read the tiny micro-expressions on my face and know exactly how close I was to completely shattering. I found her exactly where I knew she would be up on the roof, wrapped up in a worn, oversized gray sweater, sitting on a rusted metal lounge chair. The night air was unseasonably cool, carrying the faint, metallic scent of impending rain and city exhaust. When the heavy metal roof door clanged shut behind me, she did not flinch, and she did not even ask why I was there. She just took one long look at my tense shoulders, the tight set of my jaw, stood up without a word, and went down the stairs to her kitchen. 10 minutes later, she returned carrying 2 steaming ceramic mugs of black coffee. She handed the dark blue one to me and bumped her shoulder gently against mine as she sat back down. "Let me take a wild guess," Avery said, her voice a low, comforting rumble in the quiet night. "Celeste told you to wear a beige dress to the engagement party, so you blend seamlessly into the floral arrangements. And Randall asked if you could take a quick look to proofread the prenuptial agreement before Friday." I let out a harsh sound that was caught somewhere halfway between a laugh and a sob. I brought the mug to my lips and took a slow sip of the coffee. It was bitter, strong, and perfectly hot. Worse, she called it an emotional accident again, and then she told me I need to be mature about it. Avery, I am 34 years old. I am so unbelievably tired of being the mature one. I am tired of being the designated human shield for their complete and total lack of basic human decency. Avery sighed deeply, her dark eyes flashing with a familiar, fiercely protective anger. She leaned her back against the low concrete parapet, looking out over the glowing electric grid of downtown Charlotte. The evening wind tugged gently at the loose strands of her dark hair. "You know," she started, her tone deliberately shifting into something lighter, attempting to throw me a rope and pull me out of my dark spiral. "I was actually on a date on Friday night. A guy from a boutique wealth management firm downtown. He spent 45 uninterrupted minutes explaining the intricacies of cryptocurrency to me, and then, when the bill came, he asked if I wanted to split an appetizer because he is currently trying to maximize his aggressive investment portfolio. I swear to you, Scarlett, the dating pool in this city is not even a pool anymore. It is a highly toxic, radioactive puddle." I managed to form a genuine smile, feeling the suffocating, tight knot in my chest loosening just a tiny fraction. "He asked you to split an appetizer. A $12 plate of rubbery calamari," Avery confirmed, shaking her head in exaggerated, mock disgust. It honestly made me realize something profoundly sad about our generation. Modern romance is a complete financial scam. Men who wear corporate fleece vests over tailored dress shirts are an absolute menace to polite society. Honestly, if it is this bad out there, maybe marrying your best friend is the smarter move. It was a classic Avery Quinn statement. It was cynical, it was sharp-witted, and it was designed entirely to make me feel better about my own miserable situation. I let the comforting warmth of the ceramic coffee mug seep into my cold, trembling palms. I turned my head and looked at her. Really looked at her. I noticed her relaxed posture, the familiar, strong curve of her jawline illuminated by the city glow, the way the distant streetlights reflected softly in her dark eyes. For 8 long years, she had been my designated emergency contact, my unpaid therapist, my sounding board, my only real home in a world full of transactional relationships. I felt a sudden, massive wave of emotional exhaustion wash over me, a bone-deep weariness born from a lifetime of doing the right thing for the absolute wrong people. I wanted to stay up on this quiet roof forever, perfectly insulated from Grant, from Violet, from the crushing expectations of my parents. I laughed softly into the cool air. finally feeling the residual tension drain out of the back of my neck. I raised my coffee mug in a lazy mock toast, a casual, entirely throwaway gesture meant to play along with her cynical game. "Then marry me," I said. I took another long sip of my coffee, feeling the heat travel down my throat, fully expecting her immediate, predictable reaction. I waited for her to grab the small decorative pillow from the lounge chair and throw it directly at my head. I waited for her to bark out a loud laugh, or to immediately offer a highly sarcastic counterproposal involving a rigorous prenuptial agreement over who gets primary custody of her expensive espresso machine. I waited for the comfortable joke to land perfectly, so we could move on to viciously mocking my sister's predictably tacky choice of wedding colors. But the familiar laugh never came. The silence stretched out between us, suddenly becoming incredibly heavy, feeling as though it was actively pulling all the breathable oxygen out of the damp night air. I slowly lowered my mug and turned my head to look at her properly. Avery had gone completely, unnervingly still. The playful, cynical smirk had entirely vanished from her lips. Her relaxed posture had stiffened into rigid attention, and her hands were gripping her own coffee mug so tightly that her knuckles were turning stark white under the ambient light. But it was the look in her eyes that made my breath catch painfully in my throat. The easy, comfortable, platonic affection that usually lived in her gaze was completely gone, replaced instantly by something entirely different and entirely terrifying. It was an intense, piercing vulnerability, a raw, completely unshielded emotion that I had never, not once in 8 years, seen directed at me before. The physical space between us seemed to physically crackle with static, the atmosphere violently shifting from a casual, comforting Tuesday night hangout to something incredibly precarious and heavy. She looked at me for a very long time. The distant city traffic hummed faintly in the background, feeling like it belonged to an entirely different planet, a world away from the sudden, terrifying quiet of the rooftop. Then, Avery parted her lips and finally spoke. Her voice was not a joke. It was not laced with her usual protective sarcasm. It was a soft, trembling, devastatingly sincere whisper that cut straight through the cool night air and straight into my chest. "I thought you would never ask." I froze completely. My mind, a machine usually so sharp, analytical, and ready for any crisis, completely short-circuited. I stared at her, totally paralyzed by the sudden, crushing weight of those 6 simple words, "Shkima." My heart began to pound against my ribs, an erratic, frantic, warning rhythm echoing in my ears. In a span of maybe 5 seconds, absolutely everything I thought I knew about my perfectly structured life tilted violently on its axis. Every late-night phone call when I could not sleep, every lingering hug at the door, every single time she had fiercely and aggressively defended me against Grant's casual, dismissive comments. It all rushed back to me in a blinding flash, viewed through a sudden, terrifying new lens. All those 8 years of standing faithfully side by side took on a completely different, undeniable meaning. I opened my mouth to speak, desperate to say it was just a stupid joke, to rapidly backtrack, to force a laugh and reset the atmosphere back to normal. But the panicked words died instantly in my dry throat. I looked at Avery, seeing the quiet desperation and the terrifying, fragile hope written all over her illuminated face, and I realized with a sudden, sinking feeling of absolute dread that an invisible line had just been crossed. The careless joke had evaporated up into the night sky, leaving behind a profound and highly dangerous truth. It was a singular moment in time that could never be taken back. A heavy steel door that had just been kicked wide open, and standing there frozen on that rooftop. I knew with absolute, terrifying certainty that my carefully controlled, meticulously planned life was about to be completely torn apart. The air on the roof grew incredibly thin. I stared at Avery, searching her face for the familiar punchline that would let me off the hook and reset our reality back to normal. There was none. Avery slowly set her coffee mug down on the rusted metal table between us. The ceramic clink sounded like a heavy wooden gavel dropping in a silent courtroom. Avery, I started, my voice barely a whisper against the city wind. She held up a hand, stopping me before I could formulate a defense. I know. I know what you are going to say. Scarlett, you are going to say it was just a joke, and maybe it was for you. But I cannot keep pretending it is a joke for me. She leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made my chest physically ache. I have loved you for a very long time, not as a best friend, not as a safe confidant. I have loved you in the way people write entire novels about. But how could I say anything? You were with Grant. You were building this entire meticulous life with him, planning the perfect wedding, securing the perfect future, and then, when it all completely fell apart, you just locked yourself away. You threw on your professional armor and decided you had to play the role of the strong one. You never let anyone in to help you carry the weight of that betrayal. If I had confessed my feelings back then, you would have run. You would have shut me out completely, and losing you was the one risk I absolutely refused to take. I sat frozen on the lounge chair. My mind raced backward, tearing violently through 8 years of memories, ripping away the protective, platonic film I had placed over our friendship. I thought about the midnight phone calls when I was overwhelmed with contract disputes, the spontaneous weekend drives to the coast just because I said I needed to breathe actual ocean air. The way I reflexively searched for her face in crowded rooms. Every single time something monumental or devastating happened in my life, I never looked for Grant. I looked for Avery. The realization hit me with the sheer force of a physical blow. The safe haven I had always run to had never been just a friendship. It had been the quietest, most enduring love I had ever known. I am terrified, I admitted, the honest words slipping past my lips before my brain could censor them. Avery smiled, a soft, heartbreakingly gentle expression that completely transformed her face. Good. Because I am terrified too. We do not have to figure it all out tonight. Scarlett, we do not need to put a restrictive label on this right now. But I am not going to hide it anymore, and I am asking you not to run away from it. I reached across the small space between us and took her hand. Her fingers were cold from the night air, but her grip was firm, instantly grounding me. I am not running, I promised. It was a sweet, delicate shift in our universe. We sat there in the quiet, our hands intertwined. Yet, beneath the surface of that beautiful revelation, a heavy knot of anxiety twisted deep in my stomach. For the first time in my fiercely independent life, I was standing on the precipice of something entirely real. Something that could actually break me if I let it fall. The absolute peace of the moment felt incredibly fragile, as if a storm was gathering just out of sight, preparing to tear everything apart. The next morning arrived with a hazy, surreal quality. I woke up in Avery's spare bedroom, the pale morning light filtering brightly through the horizontal blinds. The emotional earthquake of the previous night felt like a vivid fever dream, yet the residual warmth in my chest confirmed it was all entirely real. I walked into the kitchen at 7 a.m. to find Avery already dressed in her tailored suit for her law firm, leaving a fresh pot of dark roast coffee and a yellow sticky note on the counter that simply read, "Have a good day." No running, I smiled to myself, pouring a cup, feeling a strange, unfamiliar sense of lightness. I sat down at the small kitchen island and opened my laptop to casually check my personal emails before heading into the Arborline Civic Partners office. Nestled quietly between a retail promotional newsletter and a digital reminder for an upcoming dental appointment was an automated message from a major national commercial bank. The subject line was flagged in bright red. It read, "Urgent overdue payment notice." I frowned, setting my coffee mug down hard enough to spill a few brown drops onto the granite counter. I prided myself on my immaculate financial record. I never carried a balance, and I certainly never missed a scheduled payment. I automatically assumed it was a highly sophisticated phishing scam, but when I expanded the sender details, the routing address was entirely legitimate. I clicked the email open. It detailed an overdue interest payment on a massive commercial revolving credit line. The amount due was for tens of thousands of dollars, and the account was marked as 30 days past due. "This has to be a system error," I muttered out loud to the empty kitchen. I immediately dialed the customer service number listed at the bottom of the formal email, my corporate compliance instincts instantly overriding my morning calm. After navigating a tedious, robotic, automated menu for 10 solid minutes, I finally reached a human representative. "Hello, my name is Scarlett Kendrick. I received an email alert regarding an overdue payment on a credit line, but I absolutely do not have any open commercial accounts with your institution. I firmly believe there has been a routing mistake," the representative typed loudly on her mechanical keyboard. "Let me pull up the master file. Miss Kendrick." "Ah, yes, I see the flagged account here. It is not under your personal name as the primary corporate entity. The commercial credit line is legally registered to Kendrick Heritage Holdings." My blood ran completely cold. The breath hitched painfully in my throat. Kendrick Heritage Holdings was a private family trust company. It had been established by my grandmother decades ago to manage a portfolio of old real estate assets. But after she passed away 5 years ago, the company had been completely shuttered. It was essentially a ghost entity. There was absolutely no active business being conducted, and certainly no logical reason for a massive commercial credit line to be active. "I am sorry," I said, struggling violently to keep my professional voice steady. "Could you repeat that? Did you say Kendrick Heritage Holdings?" "Yes, ma'am," the representative replied cheerily, entirely oblivious to the floor dropping out from under me. "Kendrick Heritage Holdings. However, your legal name and personal contact information are directly attached to the master file as the primary point of contact for all default notices." "Thank you," I managed to choke out before ending the call abruptly. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I placed the phone flat on the kitchen island. The unfamiliar, beautiful peace I had woken up with was entirely eradicated, replaced instantly by a cold, sharp, suffocating dread. I needed to call my father. I needed to demand an immediate explanation. But before my trembling fingers could dial his number, my phone vibrated rapidly against the granite. It was a text message from Avery checking in. I bypassed the text and immediately called her instead. She answered on the very first ring. "Avery, something is horribly wrong," I said, the raw panic finally bleeding through my carefully controlled voice. I rapidly explained the bizarre email, the confirming phone call, and the nature of the dormant family holding company. As a senior paralegal who spent her entire professional life dissecting corporate fraud and complex commercial litigation, Avery did not hesitate for a single second. Her tone shifted instantly from affectionate partner to strictly tactical professional. "Do not call Randall. Do not call Celeste. Do not alert anyone in your family that you know about this." "Why?" I asked, pushing my chair back and pacing the short length of her kitchen. It could just be a massive administrative oversight. A terrible clerical error from when the estate was legally settled. Banks do not make clerical errors that magically attach personal email addresses to commercial credit lines without signed legal authorization. "Scarlett," Avery said firmly, her voice a sharp anchor in my rising panic. "Someone had to manually input your specific contact information for those default notices. If your family is actively using a dormant shell company to pull major credit, and they tied you to it without your knowledge, asking them about it right now will only give them the time they need to cover their digital tracks. You need to look at the internal corporate files yourself. Can you access the holding company records?" I stopped pacing, staring blankly at the refrigerator door. My father used an archaic cloud-based server for all the family estate documents. I still have the master administrative login credentials he gave me 3 years ago when I helped him audit the state property taxes. "Log in immediately," Avery instructed, the urgency radiating through the phone speaker. "Look for anything modified recently. Download absolutely everything you can find, and do not leave a digital footprint." I hung up and pulled my laptop closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in the old web address and the complex string of characters for the password I had memorized years ago. To my absolute shock, the secure portal opened immediately. The administrative dashboard was a chaotic mess of disorganized digital folders. I clicked on the main master directory for Kendrick Heritage Holdings. My stomach plummeted directly to the floor. The folder, which should have been completely untouched for half a decade, was overflowing with new subfolders. I quickly checked the system metadata. Dozens of highly complex files had been created and modified within the last 6 months. Several crucial financial folders were locked tightly behind secondary encryption firewalls, but a few loose legal documents had been left carelessly in the general directory. I clicked on a massive PDF document labeled with a string of dates and the word agreement. It was a staggering 50-page commercial loan contract. The dense legal jargon blurred together as I aggressively scrolled through the digital pages, my trained eyes scanning desperately for names, dates, and financial terms. It was a multi-million-dollar corporate financing agreement. I reached the final pages of the document, scrolling down to the execution and signature blocks. I saw my father's signature boldly written on behalf of the holding company, but that was not what made the kitchen spin. Directly beneath the corporate authorizations was a separate, highly distinct legal section. The bold header read, "Individual Personal Guarantor." I stared at the glowing screen, my vision tunneling until the only thing I could see was the black text, printed perfectly clearly on the dotted line, legally guaranteeing the entire astronomical sum of the corporate debt with my own personal assets and future earnings, was my full legal name. And right beside it, executed flawlessly in digital black ink, was a signature that looked exactly like mine. The terrifying vulnerability I had felt on the rooftop the night before was absolutely nothing compared to this. The solid ground beneath my feet had completely vanished. I was not looking at a clerical error. I was not looking at an administrative oversight. I was looking at a financial death sentence, quietly signed, sealed, and delivered by the very people who shared my blood. Avery was back in her apartment within 30 minutes, having practically sprinted from her office the moment I sent her a frantic text confirming my worst fears. She did not bother changing out of her suit. She simply dropped her briefcase by the door, pulled a heavy-duty external hard drive from her bag, and commandeered my laptop. "We need to create local copies of absolutely everything before someone realizes you logged into the family server and wipes the directory," she said, her fingers flying across the trackpad. I stood behind her, watching the progress bars fill up on the screen as hundreds of encrypted files were duplicated onto her drive. The kitchen was dead silent except for the frantic clicking of the mouse. As the documents downloaded, we started opening them one by one, dissecting the anatomy of my execution. The centerpiece of the entire operation was a massive urban waterfront revitalization initiative called the Juniper Key Project. It was an incredibly ambitious, wildly expensive undertaking. As I scanned the executive summary, a familiar name jumped off the digital page and wrapped its hands tightly around my throat. The managing director of the Juniper Key development was Grant Hollowell. My stomach violently twisted. Grant was not just borrowing a little money, he was securing a commercial loan worth tens of millions of dollars. And right there, buried in the compliance appendix of the loan application, was the second devastating blow. The external consulting firm hired to audit the development and certify its legal compliance was Arborline Civic Partners, my employer, my exact department. "Look at this," Avery said, her voice dropping an octave as she opened a subfolder containing exported email correspondence. "These are internal approvals. They are authorizations to bypass the standard environmental risk checks and expedite the funding release." I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the sender details. They were sent from my official corporate email address. The signature block was mine. The phrasing perfectly mimicked my usual sterile, professional tone. I checked the timestamp on the most damning authorization. It was sent at almost 1 o'clock in the morning on the 12th of November. A cold, sharp clarity washed over me. "I did not send that email," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I know exactly where I was on the night of the 12th of November. I was sitting in the emergency waiting room at Memorial General Hospital. My father had experienced a mild cardiac event. I spent the entire night holding my mother's hand, getting her bad coffee, and assuring her that everything would be fine. While I was guarding my father's hospital room, someone was remotely accessing my secure work terminal to forge compliance approvals for Grant. Suddenly, the events of the past 6 months began to align with sickening precision. I thought about my department head, Owen Mercer. Owen was a polished, aggressively ambitious man who had always treated me with a distant, professional respect, but lately, his behavior had shifted. I remembered the sheer volume of thick manila folders he had casually dropped onto my desk late on Friday afternoons. "Just standard procedural sign-offs, Scarlett," Owen had said, flashing his perfectly bleached smile. "We are on a tight deadline for the waterfront portfolio. I just need your initials on the final pages to keep the pipeline moving." I had trusted him. I had trusted the internal review process. I had blindly initialed stacks of paperwork, assuming my team had already vetted the contents. Avery pushed away from the kitchen island and began to pace the short length of the room. Her legal mind was actively constructing the architecture of the trap. "This is not a petty fraud scheme, Scarlett. This is a masterfully designed, completely enclosed loop. It is a perfect scapegoat structure." She stopped pacing and looked directly at me. "Grant is heavily over-leveraged on Juniper Key. It is a massive risk. If the project defaults and the entire thing collapses, the bank is going to come looking for their tens of millions of dollars. They will look at the guarantor. That is you. Then, the state regulators are going to investigate how such a toxic project passed compliance. Arborline will conduct an internal audit. Find those forged emails and your initials on the expedited approvals, and they will publicly terminate you for gross negligence. They keep their corporate reputation intact. Grant walks away clean, and you are left to absorb both the financial ruin and the criminal liability." The sheer scale of the betrayal made it difficult to draw oxygen into my lungs. A stranger could not have executed this. A random corporate hacker could not have pulled this off. The perpetrator needed intimate access to my life. They needed my exact digital signature, my social security number, the answers to my security questions, and a perfect understanding of my work schedule. I closed my eyes, a wave of profound nausea hitting me as a memory surfaced from early autumn. My mother had called me on a Sunday afternoon, her voice light and conversational. "Darling, your father and I are finally updating the estate planning and the family trusts. The lawyers are being absolutely dreadful about the documentation. Could you be a dear and send over your recent tax returns, a high-resolution scan of your passport, and that secure digital signature file you use for your contracts? It will save us weeks of administrative headaches." I had bundled my entire financial and legal identity into an encrypted folder and sent it to her without a single second of hesitation, because she was my mother. Because I was the good daughter, I had willingly handed them the exact tools they needed to build my gallows. "They built this together," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "My parents, Grant. They coordinated this entire thing." Avery did not offer any empty comfort. She simply turned back to the laptop and continued clicking through the downloaded archives. "There is one more thing here. It was buried in a shared family scheduling folder. It looks like a synced backup of Violet's personal electronic calendar." I walked back over to the screen. Avery scrolled past the current month, clicking forward to the week immediately following the upcoming engagement party. The first few days of the week were entirely blank. But on the Thursday following the extravagant celebration, a massive block of time was completely cordoned off. It spanned from 9 in the morning until 6 in the evening. The event title was typed out in Violet's signature all lowercase style: "Clean up after engagement." I stared at those 4 words until the letters blurred. They were not planning to wait for the Juniper Key project to naturally fail. They were planning a controlled demolition. The engagement party was not just a celebration of Violet and Grant. It was the final curtain call before they pulled the trigger. They were going to let me stand there, smile for the cameras, and play the role of the supportive sister, and then, mere days later, they were going to detonate the bomb that would obliterate my entire existence. I did not wait for an invitation or a scheduled appointment. I drove straight to the sprawling suburban estate the very same morning, the printed copies of the forged guarantor documents burning a hole in the passenger seat of my car. I found my parents in my father's cavernous mahogany study. Randall was standing by the large bay window, reviewing a stock portfolio on his tablet, while Celeste was casually flipping through a heavy fabric swatch book for the upcoming engagement party. I threw the thick stack of papers directly onto the center of the antique desk. The loud slap of the heavy bond paper against the wood made them both jump. "Explain this," I demanded, my voice eerily calm, stripped of any daughterly deference I had ever possessed. Randall glanced at the top page, his expression entirely devoid of surprise. He slowly set his tablet down and let out a long, theatrical sigh, the kind a weary parent gives a toddler throwing a tantrum. "You are deliberately overreacting, Scarlett. You are clearly still panicking over your romantic issues with Grant, and it is causing you to completely misunderstand standard business practices. Do not dare gaslight me," I snapped, stepping closer to the desk. "My legal name and forged signature are attached to a commercial loan worth tens of millions of dollars. I am listed as the sole personal guarantor for a high-risk waterfront development. It is strictly a temporary measure," Randall replied smoothly, waving his hand as if swatting away a minor annoyance. "The project required immediate capital bridging. Your personal credit history is the cleanest in this entire family. You have zero debt and a flawless financial profile. We simply needed to leverage your immaculate standing for a few short months until the secondary funding clears." "You committed identity fraud," I stated flatly. Celeste closed her fabric book with a sharp, decisive snap. She stood up, smoothing the front of her expensive silk blouse, her face a mask of absolute chilling indifference. "Do stop being so dramatic, darling. Every prominent family requires someone who understands the fundamental value of sacrifice. We raised you to be resilient. You have always been the most suitable person for that specific role. You are entirely capable of handling a little administrative pressure for the greater good of our legacy." Before I could process the sheer, breathtaking cruelty of my mother's words, the heavy oak doors of the study swung open. Violet strolled in, holding a cup of artisan green tea, with Grant trailing closely behind her like a well-dressed shadow. Violet looked at the papers on the desk, then looked at me, her lips curling into a condescending smirk. "Are you seriously throwing a fit over this?" Violet asked, taking a delicate sip of her tea. "You should honestly be grateful, Scarlett. For once in your perfectly rigid life, you are actually contributing to saving the family project instead of just judging all of us from your high horse." I stared at my younger sister, a woman who had already stolen my future husband and was now casually endorsing the theft of my financial ruin. She felt absolutely no shame. None of them did. Grant stepped forward, buttoning the center button of his tailored suit jacket. He projected an aura of profound, irritating maturity, acting as if he were the designated adult breaking up a playground squabble. "Let us all take a deep breath and lower the temperature in this room. Scarlett, please calm down. There is absolutely no need for this aggressive hostility. We are all on the same team here." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a slim blue folder, sliding it across the desk toward me. "I actually brought a supplementary packet of technical adjustment forms," Grant said, his voice dripping with practiced, soothing corporate diplomacy. "If you just sign these physical copies today, it will streamline the asset transfer, satisfy the bank auditors, and everything will go completely smoothly. Nobody gets hurt." I stared at the blue folder as if it contained a live explosive. I did not touch it. Instead, I listened carefully to the specific words they were using. "Once you take your administrative leave from Arborline next week," Grant continued, entirely unaware of the fatal slip he was making, "we can handle the internal restructuring quietly while you take some much-needed time off to rest." Administrative leave. I had never requested any time off. My blood ran freezing cold as the final, missing pieces of their master script clicked perfectly into place. They had choreographed the entire sequence of events. The lavish engagement party was the distraction. Immediately after Violet and Grant paraded their love in front of the city's elite, I would be abruptly forced into an involuntary leave of absence from my firm. While I was conveniently locked out of the building and the secure servers, the engineered compliance violations would detonate. All the legal fallout, the forged emails, the bypassed environmental checks, would collapse directly onto my empty desk. I turned around and walked out of the study without saying another word. Their voices echoed behind me, calling my name, demanding I come back and sign the technical adjustments, but I kept walking until I was sitting inside my car with the doors locked. My hands were shaking as I pulled my phone from my purse. The screen was lit up with 3 new high-priority notifications from my corporate email account. They were all from Owen Mercer. I opened the first message. The tone was completely devoid of his usual polished charm. It was cold, clinical, and aggressive. Scarlett, I require an immediate, detailed written explanation regarding the expedited compliance approvals you authorized for the Juniper Key properties. These documents deviate significantly from our standard risk assessment protocols. I need you in my office first thing tomorrow morning to discuss your gross oversight. He was demanding an explanation for the exact same towering stacks of paperwork he had personally shoved into my hands late on a Friday afternoon, assuring me they were just standard procedural sign-offs. Owen was not just an innocent bystander. He was an active architect in the trap, building the professional case against me to protect his own lucrative consulting fees. I drove back to the city, the silence in the car deafening. When I walked back into Avery's apartment, she was sitting on the living room floor surrounded by printed spreadsheets and highlighted legal statutes. I dropped my purse on the counter and told her everything. I told her about the temporary measure excuse, the administrative leave slip, and the threatening emails from Owen Mercer. Avery stopped highlighting. She set her pen down carefully, refusing to meet my eyes. The heavy silence stretched between us, thick with an unspoken tension that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "There is something else," Avery said softly, her voice barely carrying across the room. "And I need you to know that I am so incredibly sorry." I crossed my arms over my chest, bracing myself. "Tell me." Avery finally looked up, her dark eyes swimming with guilt. 4 months ago, I was leaving a grueling deposition at a partner law firm across town. It is the firm your father uses for his estate planning. I saw Violet in the main lobby. She was arguing with a clerk, and she was aggressively holding a thick manila folder. The tab had your full legal name printed boldly on it. It was your master personal file. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. 4 months ago, and you said absolutely nothing to me. I had no concrete proof that any crime was being committed, Avery pleaded, standing up and taking a hesitant step toward me. I knew how incredibly fragile you were after the breakup with Grant. You were barely sleeping. You were burying yourself in your work. I genuinely thought that bringing up Violet creeping around with your estate documents would only cause you unnecessary pain and paranoia. I wanted to protect you from them. A flash of rage hit me so hard I could barely breathe. The one person I trusted most had kept a crucial warning from me while my family was setting me up, but just as quickly, the anger gave way to something colder and clearer. This had not been a sudden betrayal. My family had spent years teaching me to absorb consequences that belonged to them. I was never treated like a daughter with choices. I was treated like the person expected to take the hit and stay quiet. I did not yell at Avery. I just nodded slowly, the last remnants of the obedient, dutiful Scarlett Kendrick dying quietly in that room. "Okay," I said, my voice shockingly steady, ringing with a new, terrifying clarity. "Now we know exactly who they are." The night passed in total, suffocating silence. I spent 12 agonizing hours pacing the hardwood floors of my townhouse, dissecting every single lie my family had ever told me. By the time the sun came up on Wednesday morning, the terrified, obedient daughter I used to be was entirely dead. By sunrise, I was back at Avery's apartment. She was sitting at her kitchen island, staring blankly at her cold coffee, the heavy weight of her previous confession hanging in the air. I walked right past the apologies she was clearly about to offer and slammed my hands flat on the granite counter. "I am done playing the obedient victim," I announced, my voice ringing with a sharp, foreign authority. If they want to treat me like a disposable pawn, they are going to learn how incredibly dangerous a pawn can be when it reaches the end of the board. Avery blinked, sitting up straighter. What are we doing? Scarlet. We are going to give them exactly what they think I am, I said, a dark smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. A chaotic, heartbroken, impulsive mess. And we are going to use the exact thing that started this. I reached across the island and took her hand. No more ambiguity. Avery, we are going to announce to the entire world that we are together. We are going to tell everyone that we are officially engaged. Avery's sharp legal mind caught the strategy in a fraction of a second. The surprise in her eyes morphed instantly into a brilliant, predatory gleam. It is a pressure test, she whispered, her grip tightening on my fingers. If you suddenly announce a chaotic, same-sex engagement right on the eve of Violet's perfectly curated society wedding, Celeste and Randall will completely lose their minds. They will panic. And panicking people make massive, catastrophic mistakes. Exactly, I replied. They will be so focused on doing damage control for their public image that they will take their eyes off the financial trail. We did not waste a single hour. Avery went into her jewelry box and pulled out a stunning vintage gold band with an emerald-cut sapphire that had belonged to her grandmother. She slid it onto my left ring finger. The metal felt heavy, solid, and wonderfully real. We snapped a single, candid photograph of our hands intertwined, the city skyline blurring in the background, and posted it across every single social media platform I possessed. The caption was simple. Sometimes the best thing in your life has been standing right beside you for 8 years. I said yes. The digital explosion took exactly 14 minutes. My phone began to vibrate violently against the counter. The caller ID flashed my mother's name in angry red letters. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of the pathetic, scorned woman she expected me to be, and answered the call. "Have you completely lost your mind?" Celeste shrieked. Her voice was so shrill I had to pull the receiver away from my ear. "Are you intentionally trying to smear your sister's special week, a sudden, scandalous engagement to your paralegal friend? This is nothing but a pathetic, transparent cry for attention because you cannot handle the fact that Grant chose Violet. I am in love, mother," I cried, injecting a deliberate, wavering sob into my throat. I looked at Avery and winked. Why does Violet get to be the only one who is happy? Avery has always been there for me when Grant abandoned me. We are getting married. I do not care what you or anyone else thinks. You are embarrassing yourself. Scarlet, Celeste hissed, the venom practically dripping through the speaker. Take that ridiculous photograph down immediately before you ruin the family reputation permanently. You are having an emotional breakdown. She hung up on me. I dropped the phone and burst out laughing. It was the first time I had laughed in what felt like 100 years. The hook was set perfectly. Less than 2 hours later, Grant called. I put him on speakerphone so Avery could listen. "Scarlet," Grant started, his tone a sickening blend of fake warmth and calculated concern. "I just saw the news online. Wow, this is certainly a massive surprise. Are you absolutely sure you are thinking clearly? This seems incredibly fast. I just want to make sure you are not rushing into anything you might regret." He did not care about my emotional state. He was probing the perimeter. "I have never been thinking more clearly," I sniffled, perfectly playing the role of the unstable ex-fiancé. "Avery actually cares about me. Grant, she is helping me sort through everything. My feelings, my life, my files." There was a sharp, noticeable pause on the other end of the line. "Your files?" Grant asked, his voice tightening just a fraction of an inch. "What exactly has Avery been looking at, Scarlet? You know she does not have clearance for Arborline documents or the family trust materials, right?" "Oh, just personal things," I lied effortlessly, leaning against the kitchen counter. "She is just helping me organize my home office while I take some time to process my emotions. Everything is such a mess right now." "Right. Well, just focus on resting," Grant urged, the subtle panic bleeding through his polished facade. "Do not worry about the Juniper Key paperwork or Owen Mercer. Just stay offline and let the family handle the heavy lifting." When the call ended, Avery was already opening a fresh spreadsheet on her laptop. The diversion was working beautifully. They fully believed my actions were driven entirely by romantic jealousy and emotional instability, blinding them to the cold, calculated war we were actually waging. While they were busy gossiping about my mental state and checking their social media feeds, Avery shifted into high gear. Her apartment transformed into a war room. She began compiling a brutal, systematic list of the exact legal ammunition we needed to dismantle the fraudulent loan and expose the setup. "If we are going to prove they forged your signature and bypassed the Arborline compliance protocols, we cannot just cry foul," Avery instructed, her eyes locked on the screen. "We need hard, undeniable data. We need certified copies of the bank transactions showing where the initial bridge loan funds were actually routed. We need the official meeting minutes from the boardroom when Grant presented the environmental waivers. We need the signature verification logs from the family trust to demonstrate the forgery. And most importantly, we need the raw system access logs from the Arborline servers to prove you did not send those late-night approval emails." That last requirement was the key. Arborline Civic Partners maintained rigorous internal cybersecurity. Every single keystroke, every login, every file transfer was recorded on a secure server. But as a suspended compliance director, my access had already been revoked. I needed an inside man. I picked up my phone and dialed Dean Porter. Dean was a brilliant, socially awkward digital forensics specialist at Arborline. 2 years ago, when the executive partners tried to fire him over a minor, unintentional breach of protocol, I had personally stepped in, rewritten his compliance profile, and saved his job. He owed me a massive favor, and Dean was a man who took his debts seriously. He answered on the second ring. "Scarlett, things are completely crazy around the office today. Owen Mercer is running around looking like he is about to have a stroke, demanding everyone lock down the Juniper Key directories. What is going on?" "I need your help, Dean," I said, keeping my voice low and urgent. "And I need you to do it entirely off the grid. Someone used my credentials to authorize the environmental waivers for Grant Hollowell's waterfront project. I need the raw administrative logs from the night of November 12th. I need to know the exact IP address and the physical machine location that accessed my account at 1 o'clock in the morning." Dean was silent for 10 long seconds. I could hear the rapid clicking of a mechanical keyboard in the background. "If Mercer catches me pulling those logs, he will have my head on a spike. Scarlett, if you do not pull them, Dean, I am going to prison for a fraud I did not commit," I replied firmly. "You know me. You know I would never rubber stamp a toxic project. Please." Another heavy pause, then a sharp exhale. "Give me 24 hours. I will bounce the query through a proxy server so it does not flag his dashboard. I will send the encrypted file to your personal secure drop." "Thank you," I said, the relief washing over me in a massive wave. I hung up the phone and looked over at Avery. She was watching me, a proud, fierce smile illuminating her face. The air in the apartment felt electric, vibrating with a newfound, dangerous energy. We were no longer scrambling in the dark, dodging the blows they were raining down on us. We were actively building the weapon that would cut them down at the knees. I looked down at the vintage gold sapphire ring shining brightly on my left hand. The proposal that was once a joke had now become the perfect cover for our first counterattack. The encrypted file from Dean Porter arrived in my secure inbox exactly 24 hours after our phone call. I sat at Avery's kitchen island, my pulse steady, and opened the raw administrative logs. As a corporate compliance director, I spent my entire professional life reading complex data trails, and this specific trail was glaringly obvious. The system recorded the exact digital footprint of the person who had rubber-stamped Grant Hollowell's environmental waivers. The IP addresses did not originate from my home internet network. They did not originate from my assigned desk terminal at the firm. Instead, Every single fraudulent approval email was dispatched from a secondary workstation securely located inside the executive suite on the top floor of our building. It was the private domain of Owen Mercer. I traced the system timestamps with my index finger. The logins occurred at 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Sunday, and late into the evening on a federal holiday. These were times when the building security logs could definitively prove my employee keycard had never even swiped through the lobby turnstiles. Owen had not merely looked the other way while a client bypassed regulations. He had actively impersonated me to secure his consulting firm a massive, expedited payout from the Juniper Key developers. While I documented the IP addresses and matched them against my alibis, Avery was intensely focused on her own laptop, meticulously combing through the hundreds of pages of the Kendrick Heritage Holdings portfolio we had previously downloaded. Suddenly, she stopped typing. She let out a sharp, ragged breath and pushed her chair forcefully back from the table. "Scarlett," Avery said, her voice unusually tight and lacking its usual calm cadence, "you need to look at Schedule C of the commercial loan agreement, right now." I moved around the kitchen island and leaned over her shoulder. Schedule C was the master collateral list, the formal inventory of assets my family had legally pledged to the commercial bank to secure the millions of dollars for Grant's development. I fully expected to see phantom cash reserves, manipulated stock portfolios, or overvalued commercial properties. Instead, my eyes locked onto a highly specific geographic coordinate and a registered residential property deed number. It was the lake house. A freezing wave of absolute horror washed over me, chilling me down to the marrow of my bones. The lake house was not just a piece of taxable real estate. It was a secluded, beautiful timber cabin nestled deep in the mountains, the only place in my entire childhood that held any genuine, uncalculated warmth. It was my grandmother's sanctuary. It was the place where she taught me how to fish, how to read financial ledgers, and how to value my own intelligence when my parents only ever valued social appearances. It was the sole piece of tangible legacy she had left behind in this world. And my father had secretly mortgaged it to bankroll a highly toxic urban waterfront development for my ex-fiancé. If the Juniper Key project inevitably collapsed, the bank would not just annihilate my personal credit profile. They would aggressively foreclose on the lake house, wiping my grandmother's memory off the map entirely to satisfy the corporate debt. "They used the cabin," I whispered, the betrayal cutting significantly deeper than any threat of financial ruin ever could. "How is that even legally possible?" My father was named the general executor of the estate, but my grandmother placed strict protective covenants on the real estate assets before she died. Avery was already 3 steps ahead of my panic. Her eyes darted rapidly across the screen as she opened a separate, deeply buried digital file containing the original trust formation documents. "That is exactly what I'm checking right now. General executors have incredibly broad powers, but wealthy matriarchs rarely leave their pristine assets entirely vulnerable to greedy children." She scrolled down to a heavily dense section of legal text. "Here it is. Section 4, Paragraph 2. The real property addendum." Avery turned the laptop slightly so I could clearly read the highlighted paragraph. My grandmother knew exactly how weak and reckless Randall was when it came to securing quick capital. To protect the lake house from his inevitable mismanagement, she had designated a specific successor trustee with sole, unyielding authority over any encumbrance, mortgage, or sale of the physical property. The legally designated successor trustee was not my father. It was me. According to the foundational trust documents, Avery explained, her tone sharp, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. Any decision to use the lake house as collateral for a commercial loan requires the legally verified, notarized consent of the successor trustee. That means the signature on the bank loan is not just a standard forgery. It is a fatal defect in the entire financing structure. The scattered pieces of the puzzle slammed violently into place. The sudden clarity was breathtaking. "That is exactly why Grant tried to hand me that blue folder in my father's study yesterday," I said, my mind racing through the timeline. The technical adjustment forms, The initial forged signature was enough to get the temporary bridge loan pushed through by a lazy underwriter, but someone on the bank's internal legal team must have audited the file and flagged the successor trustee requirement for the final closing. My family realizes the original forgery might not hold up under intense scrutiny. They desperately need my real, fresh signature to retroactively validate the fraudulent mortgage and patch their massive legal loophole. "If you sign those adjustment forms," Avery confirmed grimly, folding her hands on the desk, "you voluntarily reconfirm the debt. You waive your fundamental right to contest the forgery, and you legally hand them the lake house on a silver platter." I stood up straight, rolling my stiff shoulders back. The paralyzing fear that had gripped my chest for days was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating, and ruthless determination. They need me to be compliant. They need me to fold. So, I am going to give them the most compliant daughter they have ever seen. I arranged a quiet, private dinner with my parents at their exclusive country club that very evening. I dressed deliberately for the role I needed to play, choosing a conservative, slightly wrinkled navy dress. I kept my makeup completely minimal, allowing the dark circles under my eyes to show prominently, and practiced a posture of total, exhausted defeat before walking through the doors. When I arrived at the mahogany-paneled dining room, Randall and Celeste were already seated, casually sipping their expensive gin martinis. They looked at me with a sickening mixture of practiced pity and barely concealed impatience. "It is good of you to join us, Scarlett," my father said smoothly, not even bothering to stand up from his leather chair. "We were hoping you had taken some quiet time to process your recent emotional outbursts." I sat down slowly, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on the pristine white tablecloth in front of me. "I am just so incredibly tired," I whispered, injecting a slight, highly believable tremor into my voice. "The situation at Arbor Line is overwhelmingly stressful right now, and the public reaction to my sudden engagement with Avery has made everything so complicated. I simply cannot handle fighting a war on multiple fronts anymore." Celeste's rigid posture relaxed almost immediately. It was the distinct look of a predator sensing a yielding, broken prey. "We told you that sudden announcement was a dreadful, impulsive mistake, darling, but families forgive. We just want to move past this unpleasantness and protect you." I looked up, meeting my mother's gaze with wide, convincingly desperate eyes. "If I cooperate, if I sign the technical paperwork Grant prepared for the project tomorrow, can you absolutely guarantee that my professional reputation will not be harmed? I just need to know that I will not be the one left holding the blame if something goes wrong with the corporate compliance audits." Randall scoffed softly, slicing effortlessly into his expensive prime rib. "You worry entirely too much about petty office politics. Scarlett, the family protects its own interests. Once the paperwork is updated, the liability is safely shifted away from you. But it was Celeste who delivered the fatal, condemning blow, completely unprompted." She reached across the table and patted my hand affectionately, her heavy diamond rings pressing cold against my skin. "Do not fret, darling. Let your sister have her special moment in the sun. Once Violet and Grant are safely married next weekend, all of these messy administrative details will be beautifully arranged and completely swept away. You will not have to worry about a single audit or investigation. Just be a good girl, sign the adjustments, and let us handle the business." I kept my facial expression perfectly frozen in a mask of relieved gratitude. Inside my chest, my heart was hammering a triumphant, violent rhythm. She had just handed me the exact timeline of their conspiracy on a silver platter. She had inadvertently confirmed that they truly intended to use the lavish wedding as the definitive milestone to execute the cover-up and permanently erase their digital tracks. They were holding their breath until the vows were exchanged, believing the marriage would solidify the corporate merger and shield them from any legal blowback. "Thank you, Mother," I murmured, carefully withdrawing my hand from beneath hers. "I will review the forms tonight." I barely touched my food. I sat in silence and let them lecture me on proper social decorum for another 30 minutes before claiming a severe migraine and excusing myself from the table. Walking out of the heavy brass doors of the country club, the crisp, freezing night air filled my lungs like pure adrenaline. I walked to my car with a steady, commanding stride. The obedient, self-sacrificing daughter who had walked into that dining room was permanently dead. For the very first time in my life, I was no longer the one playing defense. My family thought they had successfully lured a frightened, predictable animal back into a carefully constructed cage. They were completely, arrogantly oblivious to the fact that I was the one walking away with the key, quietly locking the door behind them, and preparing to let them step blindly into the very trap they had built for me. The illusion of control I felt leaving the country club lasted exactly 48 hours. When I did not immediately return the signed technical adjustment forms by Wednesday morning, the invisible tripwire snapped, and my family unleashed their retaliation with a speed that left me completely breathless. It started at 9 o'clock in the morning. I was sitting at my desk when the Human Resources Director and an armed building security guard appeared at my glass door. Owen Mercer stood right behind them, his face a perfectly constructed mask of professional disappointment. "Scarlett," Owen said, his voice loud enough to carry across the open floor plan, "we have identified a severe violation of our internal security protocols. There has been a significant leak of highly confidential client data originating directly from your terminal. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full corporate investigation. We need your security badge and your company phone." I did not scream. I did not defend myself. I knew arguing would only give Owen the dramatic scene he desperately wanted to justify the narrative. I quietly handed over my badge, packed a single cardboard box with my personal items, and walked out of the building under the humiliating gaze of 50 colleagues. But the professional execution was only the opening act. By the time I reached my car, my phone was aggressively vibrating with notifications from my remaining personal social media accounts. An anonymous user had blasted a highly detailed, viciously fabricated post across several local society pages. The post claimed I was actively trying to sabotage my younger sister's wedding because I was consumed by a bitter, obsessive jealousy over Grant. It painted my sudden engagement to a female coworker as a pathetic, desperate stunt designed purely to steal the spotlight. Worse than the anonymous post was Violet's public reaction to it. She did not deny the rumors. Instead, she posted a vaguely sympathetic, highly manipulative response, asking people to respect her family's privacy because her older sister had been dealing with severe mental instability since the broken engagement last year. With one calculated comment, Violet neatly dismissed any future claims I might make as the ravings of a scorned, mentally unwell woman. I drove to a small coffee shop near the edge of the city, needing a quiet place to think. I ordered a black tea and handed the barista my personal debit card. "I am sorry," the young barista said, looking uncomfortably at the terminal screen. "Your card has been declined." "That is impossible," I replied, my pulse suddenly quickening. "Can you try running it again?" She swiped it a second time. The machine beeped an angry, denying tone. I pulled out my primary credit card. Declined. A cold sweat broke out across the back of my neck. I stepped out of the line, abandoning the tea, and immediately called my private bank branch. The customer service representative sounded incredibly apologetic but entirely unhelpful. My entire financial portfolio had been temporarily frozen due to a massive, outstanding debt liability linked to my Social Security number under a commercial guarantor clause. The financial vice was tightening around my neck before I could even finish building my defense. I arrived at Avery's apartment completely empty-handed and dangerously close to a total breakdown. The crushing pressure of the last 3 days finally boiled over into a toxic, blinding anger. When Avery tried to ask what was wrong, I snapped. "My accounts are frozen," I yelled, throwing my keys violently against the granite counter. "I have no job, I have no money, and half the city currently thinks I am a psychopathic, jealous ex-girlfriend trying to ruin a wedding. They are completely destroying me. Avery." "We knew they would retaliate," Avery said, keeping her voice steady, stepping toward me. "We just need to stick to the plan." "The plan?" I laughed harshly. the sound devoid of any humor. The plan is failing because we are moving too slowly. And maybe if you had not kept secrets from me for 4 months, we would not be in this defensive position. If you had just told me you saw Violet with my estate files, I could have stopped this before they forged my signature. Avery stopped walking. The warm concern in her eyes vanished, replaced instantly by a fierce, defensive fire. Do not dare put this on me. Scarlett, I kept quiet because every single time your family hurt you, you ran right back to them, begging for their approval. I cannot save a person who constantly chooses to walk back into a burning building just because the people holding the matches share her last name. Her words hit me like a physical strike to the jaw. They were brutally honest, and they hurt precisely because they were entirely true. I stared at her, my chest heaving, the silence between us turning toxic and suffocating. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out, slamming the heavy door behind me. I did not know it at the time, but my departure left Avery completely exposed. Less than an hour after our massive fight, Grant Hollowell cornered her outside her own apartment building. He had been quietly tracking her movements. Grant stepped out of his expensive black sedan, looking every inch the wealthy, untouchable developer, and offered her a thick, unmarked envelope filled with cash. Take the money and walk away from her, Grant had told Avery, his tone dripping with condescending arrogance. You are out of your league here. You might think you mean something to her right now, but at the end of the day, Scarlett will always choose her family over you. She is programmed to serve us. Do not let yourself become collateral damage. Avery completely refused the money and told him to go to hell. But when she finally called me later that evening, her pride and the residual anger from our fight made her keep that specific encounter to herself. She did not tell me about Grant's cruel words or the attempted bribe. It was a tiny omission, a slight hesitation in our absolute transparency, but it wedged a new, dangerous crack of doubt into the foundation of our trust. I spent the entire evening sitting alone in the driver's seat of my parked car at the far end of an empty municipal parking lot. The sun had completely set, plunging the asphalt into deep shadows. I had no access to my money. My professional reputation was entirely shredded, and I had successfully alienated the only person in the world who truly loved me. I had hit absolute, undeniable rock bottom. My family had engineered a flawless destruction, just as the heavy, crushing weight of total defeat began to settle permanently into my bones. My phone screen lit up in the dark cabin of the car. It was a highly encrypted direct message from Dean Porter. There was no text attached to the message. It was just a single, high-resolution image file. I opened the image. It was a raw, unfiltered administrative server log from Arborline Civic Partners. The timestamps were perfectly highlighted in bright yellow. The data painted an undeniable, devastating picture. It showed the exact minute Owen Mercer used his supreme administrative privileges to forcibly route the Juniper Key environmental waivers through my dormant account. But the truly damning piece of evidence was the scheduling log displayed directly adjacent to the server data. Exactly 2 minutes before Owen initiated the forged transfer from his private terminal, he had badged Grant Hollowell into his closed-door executive suite. The two men were physically sitting in the same room together when my digital signature was stolen. The sheer gravity of the evidence hit me with the force of a freight train. It was the smoking gun. It proved the collusion between the consulting firm and the developer, entirely destroying their clean narrative. I sat in the cold, dark silence of my car, staring at the glowing screen. For the first time in over 10 years, I felt hot tears well up in my eyes and spill over my eyelashes. I cried for the life I had lost. I cried for the grandmother they were trying to erase. I cried for the naive, desperately loyal daughter I had spent my entire life trying to be. The tears flowed freely, hot and bitter, washing away the last lingering traces of my manufactured obedience. After several long minutes, the tears finally stopped. I reached up and wiped my wet cheeks with the back of my hand. The sadness was completely gone. In its place was a sharp, diamond-hard clarity. They had taken everything from me because they assumed I would play by the polite rules of familial obligation. They expected me to simply absorb the damage and fade away. I looked at my own reflection in the darkened rearview mirror. My eyes were red, but my expression was utterly terrifying. "If they want a war," I said aloud to the empty car, my voice cold enough to freeze the air itself, "I will not fight like family anymore." I stayed in the dark for 2 entire days. I did not return any phone calls. I did not respond to the increasingly aggressive legal emails from Arborline Civic Partners. The absolute silence was my very first offensive move. People who believe they have won an easy, flawless victory absolutely despise silence. It makes them restless and paranoid. But eventually, their towering arrogance always overpowers their baseline caution. On Tuesday morning, I picked up my phone and drafted a single, meticulously calculated text message to my mother. "I am completely exhausted," I typed, making sure the tone sounded thoroughly defeated. "I am ready to sign the technical adjustment papers and close all these terrible misunderstandings. My only condition is that I am allowed to attend the rehearsal dinner as a true member of this family. I just want to save whatever is left of my dignity," Celeste replied within 3 minutes. "Of course, Vi, darling. We are so relieved you have finally come to your senses. We will have the documents ready at the dinner. See you at 7 o'clock on Thursday evening." The trap was perfectly set. My family immediately relaxed their grip, entirely convinced that the good, pliable daughter had finally broken under the immense, crushing pressure. They thought they had successfully corralled me back into my designated, quiet corner. But before I could focus my energy entirely on the upcoming rehearsal dinner, I had to repair the only vital alliance that actually mattered. I drove straight back to Avery. I found her sitting on her living room floor, surrounded by towering piles of printed legal statutes, looking completely drained. When I walked through the door, she immediately stood up, her posture rigid with defense, but before I could say a word, she raised both of her hands in surrender. "Grant intercepted me outside this building yesterday," Avery confessed, the heavy words spilling out of her in a rushed, guilty breath. "He offered me a massive envelope of cash to walk away from you. He told me that you would always choose your blood over me, and that I was just going to become useless collateral damage. I told him to rot in hell, but I was so incredibly angry after our terrible fight that I did not tell you right away. I am so sorry. Scarlett, I should have told you the very second it happened." A few days ago, that specific confession might have shattered my already fragile trust, but the terrified woman who had cried alone in her car was completely gone. I walked across the room, gently took both of her hands in mine, and looked directly into her dark, anxious eyes. "Grant is a desperate, pathetic coward," I said quietly, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "But we cannot afford a single shadow between us anymore. Avery, if we are going to survive this execution, there can be absolutely zero secrets. We do not hide ugly things to protect each other. We share absolutely everything, or we lose everything." Avery let out a long, shaky exhale, nodding slowly as the tension finally drained from her shoulders. The lingering, somewhat vague romantic ambiguity between us completely burned away in that exact moment, forged instantly into something significantly sharper and stronger. It was no longer just a hesitant, hopeful love story. It was a lethal, unbreakable survival pact between two women who finally understood the exact, brutal price of loyalty. With our ranks tightly closed, Avery took the next calculated risk. Knowing perfectly well that my family was desperate to tie up any remaining loose ends before the lavish wedding, she correctly predicted that Celeste would try to handle her directly. When my mother's polished assistant called to arrange a discreet, private meeting, Avery agreed immediately. She walked into the secluded private lounge of the country club, wearing a tailored gray suit and a legally concealed, voice-activated recording device securely fastened beneath her lapel. Our state operates under a one-party consent law for audio recordings, and Avery knew exactly how to legally bait a raging narcissist. I listened to the crystal-clear audio file later that evening. My mother's voice dripped with that familiar, poisonous charm. Avery, dear, you must understand the delicate situation, Celeste crooned through the small laptop speaker. Scarlett is simply acting out because she is emotionally fragile. If you truly care about her peace of mind, you will let her go. She needs her family right now, not a highly distracting, scandalous workplace romance. Avery played her part flawlessly, feigning a stubborn, somewhat naive concern. You are just using her to absorb Grant's massive financial mess. Avery pushed back gently, her tone completely even. That was all the friction it took for Celeste to completely lose her polished temper and let her supreme arrogance take the wheel. Every successful family has a designated role. Avery, Celeste snapped, the digital recording capturing the sharp, angry clink of her ice glass hitting the wooden table. Scarlett has always been our best financial punching bag. She is entirely used to carrying the heavy burdens, so the rest of us do not have to dirty our hands. It is exactly what she is good at. Do not dare interfere in family business you simply cannot comprehend. I smiled a cold, razor-sharp smile as the audio file clicked to a stop. My mother had just handed us the explicit intent to defraud on a silver platter. But verbal intent was not enough to guarantee a prison sentence. We needed the physical, undeniable money trail. While Avery was securing the audio confession, Dean Porter had been quietly working the digital financial underground. He managed to track down a deeply disgruntled former accountant who had been abruptly fired from the Juniper Key project just 3 weeks prior. With a little strategic persuasion and the absolute promise of total anonymity, the accountant handed over a copy of the raw, unedited corporate ledgers. The columns of numbers told a story of breathtaking, blatant embezzlement. The initial millions of dollars secured by my forged signature were never fully allocated for the urban waterfront construction. Dean meticulously traced the offshore wire transfers. Over 40% of the borrowed capital had been deliberately siphoned off the top. A massive chunk of that money had been quietly routed into a private holding account registered exclusively under Grant Hollowell's name. But the most sickening, jaw-dropping discovery was the second destination. Hundreds of thousands of dollars had been funneled directly into a boutique public relations and lifestyle media fund. I checked the state registry files for the fund. The sole managing director of that specific corporate entity was Violet Kendrick. My sweet, innocent little sister was not just a passive, lucky beneficiary of a wealthy marriage. She was actively stealing the commercial loan money tied to my social security number to secretly finance her own extravagant social media brand. They were intentionally bleeding my future dry to buy designer clothes and fund entirely fabricated marketing campaigns. I spread the compiled evidence across Avery's dark dining table. We had the administrative server logs conclusively proving Owen Mercer committed the digital forgery. We had the recorded audio of my mother proudly admitting to the financial abuse. We had the raw accounting ledgers detailing the massive, coordinated embezzlement by Grant and Violet. And we had the original, notarized trust document explicitly proving my father had absolutely zero legal authority to mortgage my grandmother's lake house. I looked up at the calendar pinned to the kitchen wall. The highly exclusive rehearsal dinner was scheduled for Thursday evening. They had intentionally chosen my grandmother's pristine property to host the intimate gathering, a final, incredibly cruel insult designed to quietly flaunt their absolute victory over my legacy. They fully expected me to walk through those heavy oak doors, keep my head bowed down in pathetic shame, and quietly sign the technical adjustment forms to guarantee their stolen wealth. I picked up the thick, heavy manila folder containing our lethal arsenal of truth. My blood ran completely cold, my heartbeat settling into a slow, steady drumbeat of pure, unfiltered anticipation. The rehearsal dinner was not going to be Violet's beautiful, triumphant stage anymore. It was going to be a public reckoning. I was going to walk right into that crowded room, look every single one of those parasites dead in the eye, and force them to rip their own masks off in front of the entire audience. The packages were sent on Wednesday afternoon. Avery and I sat side by side at her dining table, meticulously reviewing the final digital dossiers. We compiled every piece of evidence into 3 heavily encrypted folders. The first went to a ruthless civil litigation attorney Avery knew from her firm. The second was routed directly to the Executive Fraud Division of the Commercial Lending Bank. The third was dispatched to the State Contract Review Board, but we attached a strict, legally binding embargo to all 3 deliveries. We instructed them not to open the files or initiate any formal action until exactly 7 o'clock on Thursday evening, the exact moment the rehearsal dinner was scheduled to begin. With the digital traps completely armed and waiting, I had one final physical piece of evidence to secure. I left the city and drove 2 hours north into the mountains to my grandmother's lake house. The property was hauntingly quiet, the tall pine trees casting long, cold shadows across the timber porch. Stepping inside felt like walking into a time capsule. The air still smelled faintly of cedar and the sweet pipe tobacco my grandfather used to smoke. It was the only place on earth where I had ever felt truly safe, and knowing my father had secretly pledged this sanctuary as collateral for a fraudulent corporate loan made my blood burn with a fresh, violent heat. I walked straight to the master's study at the back of the cabin. My grandmother was a brilliantly paranoid woman when it came to protecting her assets from her own greedy children. I moved a heavy framed landscape painting away from the oak-paneled wall, revealing a vintage mechanical wall safe. I spun the dial to the combination she had made me memorize when I was 16 years old. The heavy steel door clicked open. Inside, resting on top of a stack of old municipal bonds, was a sealed white envelope with my name written on it in her elegant, looping cursive. My hands actually shook as I broke the wax seal. It was a handwritten letter, dated just 3 months before she passed away. The ink was slightly faded, but her words were as sharp and commanding as she had been in life. "My dearest Scarlett," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means Randall has finally allowed his supreme weakness for money to compromise the family legacy. I have watched him fail time and time again, always expecting someone else to absorb the impact of his reckless decisions. You have always been too good, too dutiful, but you must listen to me now. Never let them use the concept of family to turn you into a living signature. Your loyalty is a gift, not a blank check for their failures." A sharp lump formed in my throat. I swallowed hard and kept reading. "I knew Randall would eventually try to leverage this property," she wrote. "Below this letter is a secondary combination. It opens the heavy floor box locked beneath the desk. Inside, you will find the original, notarized designation of successor trustee. It is the only physical document with the supreme legal power to completely void any contract your father attempts to sign regarding this estate. Protect yourself, my brave girl. Do not let them take what is yours." I found the heavy floor box exactly where she said it would be. I punched in the secondary code. Resting inside was the thick, legally binding document, complete with the raised state notary seal. It was the absolute, undeniable proof that my father's signature on the commercial loan was entirely worthless. My grandmother had reached out from beyond the grave to hand me the exact sword I needed to cut them all down. I drove back to the city with the original document locked safely inside my leather briefcase. When I pulled into the driveway of my townhouse, I found a sleek silver sports car parked illegally across my designated space. Violet was waiting for me on the front porch. She was dressed in a pristine white designer coat, sipping an iced coffee as if she did not have a single care in the entire world. When I walked up the steps, she did not bother offering a fake smile. "You have been awfully quiet for the past 2 days," Violet observed, her tone dripping with a strange, cynical amusement. "Mother says you are finally ready to play nicely and sign the adjustment forms tomorrow night. I just wanted to drop by and make sure you were not planning any more embarrassing, emotional outbursts. My rehearsal dinner needs to be completely flawless." I unlocked my front door, turning to look at my younger sister. I expected to feel the familiar, suffocating wave of jealousy or betrayal. Instead, looking at her smug face, I just felt a profound, chilling pity. "You really think you won the grand prize, do you not?" I asked. Keeping my voice completely even, Violet let out a short, arrogant laugh. She stepped closer, lowering her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "Let us drop the act. Scarlett, we both know Grant is not exactly Prince Charming. He has never truly loved anyone in his entire life except his own reflection and his bank account. I am not stupid. I know I am just a highly strategic choice for his corporate image, but I am smart enough to leverage that partnership to get exactly what I want. He gets the family capital, and I get the lifestyle and the platform. We understand each other. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was breathtaking. I realized in that exact second that Violet was not the brilliant, evil mastermind of this entire conspiracy. She was just a tremendously arrogant accomplice who genuinely believed she was special enough to avoid being betrayed by a man who made a living betraying everyone. She had absolutely no idea that Grant had already set up the offshore accounts to bleed the project dry, preparing to leave her completely stranded when the legal walls finally caved in. "I suppose you do understand each other," I replied smoothly, stepping inside my house. "I will see you tomorrow night. Violet." I shut the door in her face, leaving her standing alone on the porch. Later that evening, as I sat on my living room sofa going over the timeline for the final confrontation, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a direct text message from Grant. The digital words glowed brightly in the dim room. "Just keep quiet and smile through the end of the week. If you sign the technical adjustments tomorrow, I will personally arrange for your name to disappear from the guarantor file entirely. You will be free and clear. Do not ruin this for yourself." It was a desperate, panicked bribe. It was a near confession typed out in black and white. He was terrified of my silence, trying to buy my compliance with a fake promise. I took a screenshot of the message, forwarded it directly to the civil litigation attorney, and turned my phone completely off. I left my townhouse and walked the 6 blocks to Avery's apartment building. The air was biting cold, the city sky clear and heavy with stars. I climbed the stairs to the roof. Avery was already there, leaning against the low concrete parapet, looking out over the glowing grid of downtown Charlotte. She turned around when she heard the heavy metal door shut behind me. There were no sarcastic jokes tonight. There was no comfortable, evasive banter to soften the edges of the reality we were standing in. The atmosphere was incredibly tense, charged with the electric anticipation of a looming war. I walked over to her and stood by her side. I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out the vintage gold and sapphire ring she had given me, and slowly slid it back onto my left hand. The heavy metal felt like armor. "Are you absolutely ready for this?" Avery asked, her voice a soft, steady anchor in the freezing wind. "Once we walk into that dining room tomorrow night and drop the evidence, there is zero chance of going back. You will be burning your entire family to the ground." I looked down at the glittering city lights, thinking about the lifetime of quiet sacrifices I had made, the constant appeasement, the forged signatures, and the absolute cruelty of their betrayal. I thought about the letter from my grandmother resting in my briefcase. "I spent 34 years trying to be the person they wanted," I said, my voice ringing with a cold, terrifying resolve. "I am never going back to being that girl. Not for them, not for anyone." I turned my head and met Avery's dark, fierce gaze. "We are not walking in there tomorrow to ask them for justice or to beg for an apology. We are walking in there to take our lives back." Avery reached out and intertwined her fingers tightly with mine, the cold metal of the sapphire ring pressing firmly against her skin. We stood together on the edge of the roof, 2 women completely pushed to the brink, watching the city breathe, waiting for the sun to rise on the final reckoning. The rehearsal dinner at the lake house was a masterclass in fabricated elegance. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of champagne, while a string quartet played softly near the edge of the water. When Avery and I walked through the heavy oak doors, the ambient chatter dipped for just a fraction of a second. My family looked at us, their eyes filled with a sickening blend of relief and condescending triumph. They genuinely believed I had returned to surrender. They saw my quiet demeanor as absolute defeat, and they looked at Avery as nothing more than a weak, irrelevant +1 who had completely failed to save me. I decided to let them enjoy their grand illusion for just a little while longer. I stood quietly near the back of the room with a glass of sparkling water, watching them perform. My father stood up first, tapping his crystal glass with a silver spoon. "To family," Randall proclaimed, his voice echoing across the expansive timber dining room. In the world of business, there are always unexpected hurdles, but a true family always stands together, makes the necessary sacrifices, and protects its legacy. Violet followed him, raising her glass with a perfect, practiced smile. She wore a stunning silk dress purchased with stolen money. "Grant and I are just so incredibly blessed," she announced, making sure her voice carried to every single guest. "Love is about finding the person who truly understands your vision. We built something beautiful together, and we are so grateful for everyone who played a part in making our dream a reality." Grant stood beside her, radiating an unbearable smugness, nodding along to her speech. I even spotted Owen Mercer standing near the catered buffet, sipping a scotch and looking entirely unbothered, perfectly playing the role of the innocent corporate consultant celebrating a successful client merger. At exactly 15 minutes before 7 o'clock, Celeste made her final move. She approached me with that familiar, poisonous smile, carrying the blue folder containing the technical adjustment forms. A few of their closest society friends gathered around, acting as informal, intimidating witnesses. "Darling," my mother cooed, holding out a silver pen, "it is time to put all this unpleasantness behind us. Just sign these voluntary confirmation papers, and we can finally celebrate Violet and Grant without any lingering shadows." I looked at the pen, then looked directly into her eyes. I did not reach for the folder. "Before I sign anything," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the quiet hum of the room, "I actually prepared a special presentation for Violet and Grant, a family memory video to celebrate their unique bond. I sent the file to the audiovisual team earlier. I would love for everyone to watch it first." Celeste frowned slightly, clearly annoyed by the delay, but Grant waved his hand dismissively. "Let her play it, Celeste. It is a nice gesture." The string quartet stopped playing. The large projector screen at the front of the room lowered automatically. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn, plunging the room into a cinematic dimness. The video began, but there were no childhood photographs. There was no romantic music. The very first image that flashed onto the massive screen was a harsh black-and-white scan of the raw administrative server logs from Arborline Civic Partners. The timestamps and IP addresses were highlighted in brilliant neon yellow. Owen Mercer dropped his glass of scotch. It shattered loudly against the hardwood floor. Before anyone could speak, the slide changed. It showed a side-by-side forensic comparison of my actual digital signature and the blatant forgery on the commercial loan agreement. Then, the screen shifted again, displaying the private accounting ledgers. The offshore wire transfers were circled in bright red, clearly showing how 40% of the borrowed tens of millions of dollars had been secretly funneled into Grant's private holding account and Violet's boutique media fund. A loud collective gasp rippled through the room of wealthy guests, but the absolute fatal blow was the audio. The speakers crackled to life, and my mother's unmistakable, shrill voice echoed off the timber walls. "Scarlett has always been our best financial punching bag. She's entirely used to carrying the heavy burdens, so the rest of us do not have to dirty our hands." Celeste turned completely white, her jaw dropping in absolute horror. The final slide locked onto the screen. It was a high-resolution scan of my grandmother's notarized trust document, unequivocally naming me as the sole successor trustee, legally voiding the entire mortgage on the lake house. Beside it was the desperate text message Grant had sent me the night before, begging me to keep quiet in exchange for my freedom. The silence that followed was deafening, but it only lasted for 3 seconds before the entire room violently exploded. "This is a fabricated lie," Grant shouted, his face flushing crimson. He pointed a trembling finger directly at Owen Mercer. "Mercer handled the compliance paperwork. He assured me everything was legally sound. He must have forged the internal approvals to secure his consulting fee." "Don't you dare pin this on me, you arrogant fool!" Owen roared back, abandoning his polished persona entirely. Violet and Randall physically brought me those forged guarantor documents. They orchestrated the entire asset transfer. I am a victim of their family fraud. The room devolved into a vicious public collapse. The people who had spent their entire lives pretending to be the pinnacle of high society were now screaming, pointing fingers, and tearing each other to shreds to save themselves. Violet stood frozen near the head table, staring at the screen. She looked at the offshore wire transfers again, realizing that Grant's private account held significantly more stolen capital than her media fund. The terrible, crushing realization finally hit her. Grant had deliberately isolated the majority of the embezzled money. He had meticulously prepared to throw Violet under the bus as his primary scapegoat if the authorities ever investigated the project. For the very first time in her pampered life, Violet tasted the exact same bitter, humiliating betrayal she had so casually inflicted upon me. At exactly 7 o'clock, the heavy oak doors swung open again. 4 individuals walked into the dining room. 2 of them were senior representatives from the commercial bank's executive fraud division, and the other 2 were civil litigation attorneys acting on my direct behalf. Grant Hollowell and Randall Kendrick, the lead attorney announced, holding up a thick stack of legal injunctions. Effective immediately. The Juniper Key commercial credit lines are completely frozen pending a federal fraud investigation. We are hereby seizing all physical and digital documents related to this property and the corporate loan. The trap had snapped shut flawlessly. Grant could not delete a single file. My parents could not shred a single document. As the guests scrambled to leave the toxic environment, Randall rushed over to me. He looked older, smaller, and entirely desperate. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my coat. "Scarlett, please," my father begged, his voice cracking. "You have made your point. You have ruined the wedding, but you have to stop the bank. Call your lawyers off. We can handle this privately. Think about the family name. Think about our reputation." I looked down at his hand, then looked directly into his terrified eyes. I felt absolutely nothing for him. "You do not want to save this family," I said, my voice cold and unyielding. "You just want to keep your favorite human shield. I am done bleeding for you. Do not ever contact me again." I turned my back on him and walked out of the lake house, leaving them to drown in the wreckage they had built with their own hands. The fallout over the next few weeks was swift and absolutely brutal. I was immediately cleared of all fabricated charges and offered my director position back at Arborline, though I chose to resign and start my own independent consulting firm. Owen Mercer was publicly terminated and stripped of his corporate licenses. The Juniper Key project completely collapsed, triggering a massive federal investigation into Grant Hollowell's business practices. The lavish society wedding was permanently canceled, and my family's pristine reputation was reduced to ashes in the local press. One quiet Friday evening, about a month after the rehearsal dinner, I found myself back exactly where this entire journey had started. I was standing on the rooftop of Avery's apartment building. The city skyline glowed warmly against the dark night sky. The air was crisp, but I did not feel cold. I felt lighter than I had in 34 years. Avery walked up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist and resting her chin on my shoulder. We stood there in comfortable silence, listening to the distant hum of the traffic below. I turned around to face her. I looked at the fierce, brilliant, fiercely loyal woman who had stood by my side when the entire world had tried to bury me. I took a deep breath, letting the absolute peace of the moment settle into my bones. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant diamond band. "Avery Quinn," I said, my voice slow, calm, and perfectly steady. This time, there was absolutely no sarcasm. There was no desperate need for an escape hatch. I had reclaimed my name. I had taken back my life, and I had finally earned the right to love someone who had never viewed me as a sacrifice. "Will you marry me?" Avery smiled, her dark eyes shining with tears and an overwhelming, beautiful joy. "I thought you would never ask." Thank you so much for listening to my story today. and I would love to know where you are listening from. So please leave a comment below so we can interact and share our thoughts together. Please subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so the story in this video can be heard by many more people.